I'm assuming that you don't just leave all that stuff nice and pretty on the displays. You actually do something with it, right?
Well, I feel like if I tell you that, then people are gonna start thinking that I actually lift instead of just collect and polish.
Uh, What's up, everybody? Joe Gray here today with another AMA warm up where I get to talk to our upcoming AMA guests. Today I'm joined by Efren. Efren, what's up, dude?
Hey, Joe,
Hey,
thanks for
man.
having me.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad you're here. For those of you who don't know Efren, you're going to get to know a little bit about him today, his lifting, his background. If you do know him, you probably know him as that vintage weights guy that has just way too much stuff crammed in his garage, but somehow manages to make it look pretty cool at the same time. So, all right, man. Let's get into it. First question is, I think I told you, who are you? Why are you here?
Definitely. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to being on your AMAs for a little bit of time now. I think we started talking about it last year, maybe
It's
trying to schedule
possible.
it, but
Yep.
you've been a busy man with,
Yeah.
your things keeps blowing up, your garage gym competition, everything just seems to be pretty cool. So thank you for having me.
Of course.
So, I think my story goes back a few years now in the sense that I probably, to your point, was one of the first home gym members who went above and beyond when it came to aesthetics, right? It was a lot of custom everything, my colors, my nameplates, at the time when it was really funny, I was actually just telling the story to somebody back when the big home gym companies just weren't into custom for the home gyms. They did everything for the professional teams, for the big college teams, but for the home gyms, they were kind of like, nah, that's not really for us. And so at the time, I remember pretty much begging everybody to help me change the color of my racks or my cross members or my attachments or whatever that may be, right? Custom everything.
Hmm.
And at the time it was just really difficult, but it was just something that I was always interested in. I've always been pretty handy. And I felt that if I couldn't do it myself, then I could hopefully have somebody help me. And so that's how I started doing, different powder coating, um, different finishing, different welding with my friends, different pieces. And over the years, basically, I started doing really high-end custom pieces. It's kind of interesting how in some ways, I was really the very first person to have a knurled camber bar, and that's because I did my custom Cadillac, right? It was the
Hmm.
very first one. Like nobody had ever even considered doing that at the time. People would complain about it, like, "Hey, how come the Caddy doesn't have knurled?" But
Right.
obviously, we know that it just exponentially added to the cost.
Yeah.
Well, at the time, I took it upon myself to figure out how to get one, and the Kabuki team helped me, and I was able to just get just basically the frame of it, and from then on, I went to cutting it, and actually I had Chris at Mutant Metals sent me the handles, and it was a whole deal, but that was really an experience that I think helped me learn a lot, and also probably gained me some exposure in terms of people out there in the community knowing that I was just super into these custom projects that at the time just really weren't being done. And from then on, I started doing crazy things like um, powder coating my lever arms at the time and just doing a lot of different custom tracks and like my chrome tree that it ultimately ended up being my really big tree that at the time nobody wanted to do for me. And yeah, I was just super happy with it. And what's funny is that when I did that, I think it was right around the pandemic, really, when all of a sudden I got the bug to want to pursue the Ivanko chrome plates, right? And I think that was kind of the next big evolution of my gym. Once I felt that, like, okay, I have my gym, I have my rack, my weights, my bars, etc. What I would really like to be able to get something that's a little bit more than just off the shelf, and I actually just started really liking them. But of course, they're just really hard to get. And back then, they were really hard to get. But back then, nobody was really looking for them, right? People would kind of see them here and there. They were a little bit aware of them from, the 90s and the 80s, of course, and you would see them in different pictures, but people weren't really looking for them. And essentially over time, I started making contacts here and there. Back then, we didn't have, the vintage groups and we didn't have a lot of these different things, but I started making contacts with different people within the community that either had some or had heard of some. And finally, I was actually able to score my very first ones that were about 3 hours from here. And from there, I got super hooked into the Ivanka Chromes, and I was able to build. Which what's interesting is now looking back, it wasn't even that many. I think maybe it was like, I don't know, about 1,000 pounds maybe of the chrome
Right.
plates. But when I actually put them on my rack and took a picture and shared it, that was basically what at the time broke the internet. Like
Yeah.
everybody just went crazy and thought like, oh my gosh, what are those? What are those weights? Where did you get them? I remember it was featured like across all of the different pages and channels, and everybody started talking about it. And it's funny because a lot of people now tell me that in some ways, like I really helped Ivanko get, a lot of exposure because even
Sure.
back then they were a little bit more quiet,
Yeah.
and that really launched almost like the next evolution of my gym and my what I was doing at home into to really the Chrome. And from then on, I started doing a lot of different things with building my Chrome dumbbells and building a lot of Chrome things. I really got into it. And ultimately, I started switching a little bit more into the gold, right? The
Uh,
gold Ivanko, the gold dumbbells, the gold plates, etc. And what's interesting though is as you start getting deeper and deeper into collecting, really it was technically at that point was the start of the collecting journey for me, the chrome plates and the gold plates. But that really, now I know that's almost like the gateway, right? From there, you start getting into older and older
yeah.
and older and more expensive and more rare things. And ultimately you end up on the other side of the road. But that really was, the beginning. And now obviously I'm all about the really old things, 100 years old, super rare things, things that nobody else has in the world.
Uh,
And but it's interesting to look back and think about the evolution of how I went from custom equipment, custom things in my rack to the chrome to now the really old stuff.
yeah. Awesome. Yeah. No, I love the stories. To see. That's always because I said before, the best part about a home gym is making it your own. And so watching someone not, like you said, not just have a basic bar, rack, plates, bench that they bought from Rogue, which is totally cool. But like, I get excited when I see them take it another 5 steps or more. So awesome. All right, man.
Or 12.
Yeah. All right. Number two, tell me about your lifting experience. So I'm assuming that you don't just leave all that stuff nice and pretty on the displays. You actually do something with it, right?
Well, I feel like if I tell you that, then people are gonna start thinking that I actually lift instead of just collect and polish.
Uh,
So, but no, yeah, I actually do lift, and I think my story goes back to my childhood, really just my dad sharing with me the Arnold Encyclopedia, and that was probably my big exposure to just bodybuilding. And I would probably say I was really very much more into bodybuilding, um, interest in terms of the magazines and the contests and the shows and all of that, growing up. And then later, when I was actually in high school, is when I actually started doing more strength lifting and basically got into the Olympic move really more than anything. And a little bit more for at the time strength and kind of football strength training. From then on, basically, I think then over the next few decades, I'd always been more of a bodybuilding slash power. I mean, I guess now what we call power building, right? So a little bit of
mhm.
mixture of the strengths. I've always been fairly strong. I mean, maybe mediocre strong, but and then of course combine that with the bodybuilding. And over the years, what's interesting? I was actually talking to Brandon the other day. I've never really actually been in a meet or done anything like that. But I've always just been super into it. I've been lifting my whole life. It's funny, I always tell somebody that maybe it doesn't seem like it because I also like food just as much. But I definitely, I live it. I've been doing it for many, many years. I try to do it as often as, 5, 6 days a week when I can. Obviously, life gets in the way, but I love it, and I do it, and I do it with all of the things that I have. So that's pretty cool for sure.
Nice. Yep. Yeah. Oddly enough, I've been lifting at home for just over 10 years. I've been lifting since I've been about 18, sprinkled in with some stuff for sports before then. I run the garage swim competition, and I've never competed in a meet before. So, um, just stuff, right? A bunch of excuses as to why I never signed up, and I just go, someday it might happen. So, but for now, I'll keep enjoying lifting weights, and that'll work for me. So, all right, man. Number three, what's your experience with the home gym community?
Well, it's interesting because if you go back, obviously you are one of the OGs of being in your home and building your home gym and being part of the community. I probably came with what you would call maybe the second wave, maybe the third wave of, when's the next evolution of the popularity. But even back then, I mean, it was a lot of the groups that were growing, etc. It felt great because people were collaborating and helping others where there wasn't really that much information out there, and the companies weren't as interested in the home gym community. And so from one of the beginnings, I built great relationships with a lot of people in the community. And over time, I started becoming a mod of some of the really probably the biggest home gym group out there. And then over the time, I started my own group with my buddy in terms of vintage weights. And as part of the other home gym group as well. But more than anything, it's always just been I love being with the community in terms of their relationships. I really value them. And I value the sense of community. I value the sense of being able to help each other, whether that is, things that other people have lived through, whether it's tips, how to do different things, whether it's workouts, whatever it may be. And obviously now, at least more my area, my niche in terms of vintage weights, it's one of the things that it ultimately ends up being, at least for me, one of the most valuable aspects of it is just the relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, I get. I'm sure you get it too. You get DMs, emails, different stuff like that from people, and a lot of times because we're influencers or a name in the space, right? A lot of times it'll come with this like "sorry to bother you" kind of thing, right? And I always tell people, I'm like, first, don't feel sorry, right? You're not bothering me. I love this shit, right? Like I will talk all day long about home gyms and home gym equipment, whatever. So please do not apologize for sharing a common interest with myself and wanting to talk about it, right? And that's been my experience forever, has been basically everyone in this space feels the same way. You mentioned Brandon earlier. I mean, I asked Brandon about camera stuff last year, and he gave me all kinds of good stuff. I've talked to Gluck and Adam and Jake and all kinds of people. And I mean, obviously, I get a little bit special treatment from some of them just because I'm, a peer. But I mean, I've never heard anyone be like, I sent Brandon a DM and he ignored me, right? Like, I think I
Well,
at
Brandon would never do that. Gluck,
yeah.
maybe. Brandon, no.
Yeah. I've had posts on Reddit, right, that people are asking questions about vintage stuff, and I'll ping you, right, and go, "Hey, can you help this guy out?" And you do. Um, you know, Most of us are in this because we love it, and that's the community aspect all around. So, I like that answer. Um, all right, man. So that was, what did we just do? We did number one, two, and three, right? So number
Yep.
four. All right. So this is a fun one. So tell me about your best used gym equipment score.
I'm sure you realize that I've had a lot, right? In all aspects of it, whether it's finding, this $5 dumbbell to finding York deep dish to Paramounts to all kinds of different things. What's interesting is that over the last few years, things have evolved for me, and I think for just the vintage community at large, things are getting really hard to find now.
Sure.
There's an unbelievable amount of competition. Things
Yeah.
go in, minutes and hours. It used to be that You could find ads that were listed for days,
Yep.
weeks, sometimes even, years ago, months on either, the off Craigslist or the whatever.
Yeah.
Nowadays, things literally go in minutes.
Yeah.
And now, obviously, with the internet, it in some ways it's a double-edged sword, right? It's easier to find things because now people are able to, post them, etc. But
Yeah.
also now people all over the country can find them.
Yep.
And so what's interesting for me is that as things have evolved, I have realized that one of the very best things that we have going on now, as somebody who's into it, is just their relationships and people who you know and people who you help and that help you in return. And so what's interesting for me is that I would almost say that one of the best finds or gets that I've had is when I actually want um talk with one of our original collectors, who's a very famous collector who's been around for decades. And he finally told me, hey, you know what, Efren? It's time for me to pass it on to somebody else. And I flew to Washington and Oregon, and obviously down here in Southern California, and drove down with a U-Haul of 12,000 pounds worth of things. And obviously, I paid him a
Yeah.
great deal of money,
Yeah.
but it was still an unbelievable amount of things that were, essentially, grabbing an entire collection that would have taken, decades to be able to put
Sure.
together all at once.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting to me is that, yeah, obviously I go and I find the things here and there like everybody, but two, things have evolved so that it's much harder. But really for me, I would probably say the biggest finds are when you actually are able to be the one that somebody's passing the torch to you
Sure.
and essentially keeping that collection and then holding on for the next generation.
Very cool. Yeah. Yeah, I've told people I'm gonna be buried with my weights. So, which then Gluck said he's gonna show up and dig them up. So,
I believe it.
but yeah, no, that's very cool. I remember discussions of past because I used to frequent the bodybuilding equipment forums with their
Oh
vintage
yeah.
chats, and that's where I got the first kind of deep dive on everything and learned about York and all the above. Um and to your comments of things getting more difficult, I remember even so, we don't, you and I get Avonco like crazy, but York is maybe a little more difficult, right? We probably have an easier time finding Paramounts because it was here as opposed to Jackson's, right? And so I remember one of the two big ones that I helped a buddy of mine lock down were, one was a pair of York deep dish, I believe they were kilogram plates.
Mm.
So they were painted red, and I think that was the
Oh
original
yeah.
color.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and they were those of us who have hunted before, shoved in the back of a picture way back here, right? And they weren't even part of the listing. And it was messaging the guy and saying, hey, those random plates that you got shoved in the corner that look dirty and dusty and whatever, are those for sale? And I actually told the guy, like, you might want to Google search deep dish York, right? And he's like, okay, thanks. And then like a week later, I was like, hey, are they still for sale? Yeah. Okay. So like I gave him plenty of opportunity. And then the other one was full
But
set.
sorry, you know what's funny though? And this is one of the coolest things that I like about vintage weights. Those plates that you're talking about, I know them
Yeah.
and I know who's had them and who's owned them and who owns them right now.
Yeah.
Because what's
Okay.
funny is that some of those crazy things that we find, you
Yeah.
can trace them back from
Yeah.
person to person to person to
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, because they're so like few that they exist at this point, or at least that we know of, right? And then the other ones were, it was a full set of Paramounts, and it wasn't just the 45s, it was all the way down to the like the fives, and it was some random dude in Sacramento had them, and I sent the link to my buddy who lives in San Jose, and he's like, okay, holy shit, we got to go get those. And so I messaged the person, hey, can you hold these? My friend wants to come get them. He was way more dedicated than I was to go to drive, And the lady's like, yeah, sure. So she shows up and gets them. I think one of them had a cracked hub, but otherwise, yeah. So those are the two that I remember off the top of my head being like the real big like scores. And Paramount 45s are awesome, but I remember him saying like the change plates like down to the bottom were the rare ones, right? Stuff that people like had not seen before, kind of thing. So all right, man, last question. This is the most important one of the day. Tell me why people should be excited for your upcoming AMA.
Well, I think it should be different, more than anything. And I think it'll give people a chance to maybe if they have things laying around that they want to ask about, maybe somebody has, the next Unicorn Jackson plate, and I can tell them like,
uh,
hey, you hit a lottery right there.
how cool would
But
that
no,
be?
I think more than anything, it just maybe it also a good chance for everybody can look at their local Facebook ads and ask me if it's worth it or not worth it.
Yeah,
I actually get a lot of those questions, something is good or not good, and I'm always happy to help. And I definitely think I should probably look around. My buddy and I talk about how I have a shed with my extra overflow stuff. So who knows?
okay,
Maybe I can find something there that I can give away for somebody on the AMA. So that would be pretty cool.
awesome. I like it. Yeah, the trained eye is a difficult one. I know we were talking earlier about the equipment forums. I know that's where I learned what I know, and being able to spot kind of the difference between good and bad and cheap and whatever. But even then, I mean, there's unmarked stuff, right? You got a 10-pound plate and all it has on it is the tens. And it's like the
Yeah.
difference between
Yeah.
one that was made 6 months ago in a cheap
Yeah.
Chinese factory and is worth 6 cents versus one that was made, 100 years ago and is worth $10,000 or whatever is like,
Right.
oh, well, it's a half a millimeter different on the hub.
Yeah. No, and the crazy thing, and you actually talked about it earlier, the difficult part is not even being able to tell when you can see it clear pictured. It's when you're just like this obscure dark
Uh,
picture in the corner with somebody's foot,
yeah.
and then you're able to try and tell. Yeah, it's crazy. My friends and I talk about how sometimes some of these sellers figure out how to take the worst possible
Oh
picture when they're
yeah.
selling something.
Yeah. I have a pair of 100-pound Avancos that I keep on my rack for when I do my rickshaw deadlifts because the sleeve isn't very long. And so those were part of a listing that the lady was selling her son's gym equipment when he moved off to college. And all I got was a very rusty, like side angle shot of the 100 lettering. But I knew just because Ivanko has some pretty, typical letter styling, the very thick, fat kind of writing. I went, pretty sure those are Ivanko's. And originally she showed up and she only had one. And I was like, I don't want one 100. Do you have the second one? And then she found it and I got it. And then the plates that are my everyday plates, the American Olympian plates, are it was a ad down in like Riverside, so
Yeah.
closer to your area. And it was they had bought out a commercial gym, so everything was in pallets. And so they had palletized all the plates and then wrapped it in shrink wrap. So it was like seeing the lettering through the shrink wrap on a pallet in a storage facility that had no lights or whatever. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure those are the plates I want. So yeah, and
Exactly.
I've worked a couple of the guys who I know from your home gym group, the vintage group, message me every once in a while because they know I'm up in Northern California, and they'll be like, "Hey, are you close to whatever?" And most of the time it's like, no, it's that's a Napa or it's, whatever, because they don't most people don't grasp that California is, 14
Yeah.
hours from top to bottom. um, but I mean, it'll be, this random post and same thing. I'm like, what are you even looking at? And they're like, you see that it's over there and under there and around the corner. I'm like, sure. Yeah, having the trained eye to be able to spot that stuff is just always nuts. So, yeah. Awesome, man. Anything else you want to add before we call it a day?
No, just thank you again. This was pretty fun. This actually, I'm pretty sure this was the very first time I've ever done any of these with video,
Nice.
and I was excited to do it with you, and I'm excited to do the AMA. So thank you again for having me.
Yeah, other than your walkthrough with Mr. Brian Shaw, right?
That is hard. That is
Yeah.
really hard. Oh, you know
Uh,
what's funny is I've actually I was telling my wife that I gave them an incredible amount of credit, Brian and his videographer, in that they basically came in. They were so shocked when they came in, but they basically just said, "Okay, start shooting wherever we are." And actually, Brian was like in a weird, awkward spot by my garage opener, and but they didn't care. They're just like, "Let's go, let's shoot." And it was really real and authentic, but it was also like incredibly hard for me. I don't do it all the time,
yeah,
so it
yeah,
was pretty cool.
yeah. It's being on camera is a weird thing if you're not accustomed to it.
Yeah,
I did my prior life in HR. I did a whole bunch of WebEx sessions where I was talking to new hires and stuff like that, and so I got fairly comfortable being on a camera and talking to people who didn't even talk back. So that kind of helped me in the transition to what I do now. But yeah, it's an awkward thing if that's not your if you have no experience for it. So
definitely. And by the way, the last thing is that I'm pretty sure now, based on what you were saying, that you were talking about a Jaime.
talking about what?
Jaime, the
Oh,
when you were talking about
yeah.
the Paramounts and the
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
See,
Yep. Yep.
we
Yep.
know, we
Yep.
know.
Yep. He's got the was it the Mr. Fresno plates or whatever they
Yeah,
are and a few different things. And yeah, I haven't talked to him in a while, but him and I talked when we were on the equipment forums all the time
yeah,
and ended up sharing numbers and chatting back and forth and stuff. So he was really big into it before COVID blew up, and then I
yeah,
know he sold off a lot of his stuff beforehand or when COVID came, and then he had to get a real job and all kinds of fun stuff,
yeah.
and so
I actually saw him last year, I think,
yeah,
and because I was driving down, and he's in the groups. He's not really big in them, but I talked to him and I said like, yeah, can I come by? Is there anything that you want to let go? And so I met him up with him. He's a really cool guy,
yeah,
but I realized as you were talking about the red Yorks and the
yeah,
Paramount, I was like, and San Jose, I was like, oh, I know who you're
yeah,
talking about.
yeah, yeah.
It's a small
Yeah,
world.
yeah. The first interaction I had with him was we both went after the same set of dumbbells. So, because he's got that full set of iron grips, if he
Oh
still has
yeah,
them.
yeah, I think he does. Yeah,
Yeah, okay. And it was a local person, I think in Roseville by me, who was getting rid of them, and they had all but like one pair, and they were like $200 or something stupid. It was dumb, whatever they were charging. And I had posted in one of the groups like, hey, because they were trying to sell them with these benches, and I was like, does anybody know anything about these benches? Like, are these going to be a pain for me to offload or not? And he replies, don't worry about it. So then he messages me and he's like, yeah, man, I'm already on my way. I'm getting those dumbbells. Like,
funny.
yeah. All right. So for the AMA, I will leave details into the description, so that way you can join, talk to Efren, ask him all your good questions about vintage weights. I'll put a link to the walkthrough that you did of your gym with Brian, so that way people can check that out as well.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's it. So yeah, it should be a good time. And then if for some reason you missed the AMA, you can always bug Efren. I'll put links to his Instagram. I'll put a link to the Vintage Weights group on Facebook as well, so that way you can join if you want more info. people are very not judgmental in my experience. You can most certainly go in there and be the dumbest person, and they will help you not be the dumbest person, which is always appreciative. So, yeah, so that's it. Thanks,
Thanks,
man.
man.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.